I am glad to welcome you to my channel Sinister Horror Stories. Before we start the story, I would like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The first rumble of thunder woke me from a deep sleep, its low growl rolling across the sky like an ominous warning. I blinked, disoriented, my eyes adjusting to the dim light seeping through the curtains. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. Then I remembered. My uncle's cabin, miles from civilization, tucked away in the woods by the lake. It was supposed to be a weekend of solitude, a chance to clear my head. Now, as the storm brewed outside, I wasn't so sure it was a good idea. I sat up in bed, feeling a prickle of unease. The air in the room was heavy, thick with humidity, and the shadows seemed to press in around me. I could hear the wind picking up, whistling through the trees, making the old wooden cabin creak and groan. My uncle had always warned me about the storms out here, how they could come out of nowhere. I'd laughed it off at the time, but now, in the deep silence of the night, I wasn't laughing. I got out of bed and padded over to the window, drawing back the curtains just enough to peer outside. The sky was a swirling mass of black clouds, and lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the landscape for a split second. The lake was a dark, churning mass, the water rippling violently in the rising wind. I shivered, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. A loud crash of thunder made me jump, and I let the curtain fall back into place, retreating to the middle of the room. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. More wrong than just a storm. The cabin was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears strain for any sound, even the tiniest creak or whisper. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the storm getting to me. I'd never liked storms, not since I was a kid. They always brought back memories I'd rather forget. Memories of the night my father died, when a freak storm had rolled through our town and left chaos in its wake. I remember the way the windows had rattled in their frames, the wind howling like a banshee. I remember my mother's pale face, her trembling hands as she held me close. But most of all, I remember the knock on the door in the dead of night, the two officers standing there with solemn faces, the words that had changed everything. I shook my head, trying to push the memories away. That was years ago, but no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The storm was getting closer. The thunder was louder now, the lightning more frequent, and the wind was howling like a wild animal. I could feel the cabin shaking with every gust, the windows rattling in their frames. I wondered if the old place could withstand the force of the storm, or if it would be torn apart like a house of cards. I glanced around the room, my eyes falling on the old wooden chest in the corner. My uncle had told me not to open it, said it was filled with things best left alone. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Every old house has its secrets after all. But now, with the storm raging outside and the cabin feeling more and more like a trap, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I crossed the room and knelt in front of the chest, running my fingers over the Ralph wood. It was old, much older than the cabin itself, and the iron lock was thick with rust. I hesitated, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Part of me didn't want to know what was inside, didn't want to disturb whatever had been locked away for so long. But another part of me, a darker, more curious part, was desperate to know. I found an old iron key hanging on the wall nearby, half hidden behind a stack of books. It was cold and heavy in my hand, and as I slid it into the lock, I could feel my heart beating faster, anticipation and dread mingling in my chest. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo in the small room, louder than the thunder outside. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. The hinges creaked, protesting, as if they hadn't been used in years. Inside, the chest was lined with dark velvet, and the smell of old wood and dust wafted up, filling my nostrils. But it wasn't the smell that made my breath catch in my throat. It was what lay inside. There was a book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. A silver locket, tarnished and dull, with a strange symbol etched into its surface. And something else, something that looked like a bundle of rags, dark and matted with what I could only hope was dirt. I reached for the book first, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, the leather cool and slick against my skin. I opened it, the pages crackling with age, and found myself staring at strange symbols and drawings, things that didn't make sense, things that made my stomach twist with unease. There were sketches of storms, of lightning striking the ground, of trees torn from the earth. And there were other things too, things I couldn't quite make out, but that made my skin crawl. I set the book aside, my hands shaking. The storm was raging now, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, and the lightning was so bright it lit up the entire room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I could feel the cabin shaking, could hear the creak of wood straining against the force of the storm. And beneath it all, I thought I heard something else, something that didn't belong. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible over the roar of the wind, but it was there. I looked around, my heart racing, but there was no one else in the room. I was alone. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the storm was playing tricks on me. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I stood up, backing away from the chest, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from the locket. The tarnished silver locket I hadn't dared to touch. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave it alone, to close the chest and walk away. But I couldn't. The whisper was pulling me in, drawing me closer, and before I knew what I was doing, I was reaching for the locket. The moment my fingers touched the cool metal, the whisper turned into a scream so loud, so piercing, that I dropped the locket, stumbling back, clutching my ears. The wind outside howled in response, and the thunder cracked like a whip, shaking the cabin to its foundations. I fell to the floor, the scream echoing in my head, louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but it was inside me now, tearing through my mind like a hurricane. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The cabin was silent again, the storm outside nothing but a distant roar. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, and saw the locket on the floor, its chain twisted like a noose. But I wasn't alone anymore. Standing by the window, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that gleamed like lightning. It stared at me, its mouth twisting into a smile that sent a wave of cold terror through me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figure stepped closer, its eyes never leaving mine, and I knew, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake. The storm had brought something with it, something ancient, something that had been waiting for years, locked away in that chest, and now it was free. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was the figure reaching for me, its cold fingers brushing against my skin, and the whisper, endless whisper, filling my ears. Then there was nothing but the storm. Thank you for listening to the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Share your impressions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.